And again in the room, good morning for those joining us via the magic of technology. We're about to begin our last ILEAD session of the cohort. And we have a great, challenging discussion to begin with. I've sort of previewed the slides, and I'm looking forward to calls for social insurrection. I think that's essential, that at least at one time during any ILEAD, someone calls for civil disobedience. So, today we are going to hear from Mita Williams on libraries are for use, and by use I mean copying. There's a bio online, but I'm going to read it just because I think it's fascinating, and it's always good to have context for folks who are working here. So, after graduating from McMaster's Universities with honors at Bachelor's of Science in Geography and Environmental Sciences, and acquiring an MLIS from McGill University, Mita Williams was employed in a number of contract positions in public, corporate, nonprofit, government, and academic libraries before joining the Leddy library as science librarian in 1999. In 2010, her position evolved into her current role as user experience librarian. She's a founding member and one of the board of directors of a community-focused hackerspace in Windsor, Ontario called HackForge, is the lead of Open Data Windsor Essex, and hosts many monthly meetups of Map Time Windsor. Is it really GIS Map Geeks? Is this?
Yeah, it's Web Geeks and Map Geeks in general.
That is so awesome. I'm going to have to come. She's passionate about public space, civic engagement, and environmental restoration, and she keeps her spirits up by playing games and thinking about how games can improve lives and change the world. She's been blogging since 1999 and blogs about library things at New Jack Librarian. You can find her online in various spaces as CopyStar, and you can find out what events she's helped organize and contribute to at AdeliWorks?
I'm not sure whether it's AdeliWorks or AdDialWorks.
AdDialWorks.com. But in any case, she's here, so we can ask her all these questions and important stuff, and I'm really looking forward to it. So please help me welcome Mita Williams.
Hello everyone, good morning. Good morning. Good morning people in the camera. So glad you're here. And I'm very glad to be here this morning. As you can see, I have a @CopyStar. I'm quite prolific on Twitter normally, and if you're on Twitter, you may know that during the month of October, it's sort of tradition to change your name to something sort of Halloween related. So you won't be able to, I don't think you'll be able to find me by Mita Williams right now. There's a story behind my current nickname. I'll tell you about that afterwards if you're interested. But normally I go by my nickname CopyStar on most of my social networks. Which brings us to my first disclaimer, which is I'm not getting kickbacks from the Japanese photocopier company, Mita, even though my talk is largely about copying. And that's really the sort of overarching theme of this talk. It's an exploration. It's just opening up this idea that instead of normal collection development, where we buy things and we subscribe to things, we're going to look at the possibility of just copying things. And that's something we don't really think about, which is interesting because when I first discovered the fact that the most important library, at least sort of culturally, the one that sort of we keep thinking of if someone says, what is the greatest library of all time? The greatest library, the Library of Alexandria, was literally built from copies and piracy, literally piracy. This is an article that explains a little bit about the history of the library, Great Library of Alexandria. Now, just of course, the reason why the Great Library of Alexandria was great was that the king of Ptolemy or whatever, he wanted it to be great, and so he funded it. So that's the real reason, of course, right? It was very massive funding. So they bought and acquired, that time it wasn't necessarily books, they were scrolls. But this article describes some of the more dubious ways of acquiring scrolls from other people in other nations, sometimes under some duress. And this is my particular favorite story. It is widely reported that ships, upon entering the Alexandrian harbor, would be stopped, they would be inspected, and any scrolls that were found on the ships would be confiscated, taken back to the Great Library of Alexandria. A copy would be made, and then the ship owner would receive the copy, and the Great Library would keep the original. So my question today, and this is the sort of big picture question, is in this age of Control A, Control C, and Control V, or select all text, copy all text, paste all text, why isn't there a great Library of Alexandria of ebooks? I mean, copying, we don't need hand scribes anymore. Copying is it's an intrinsic property of digital media. It's so easy to do. Why, when we have to think of the sort of the greatest library of all time, we still have to look back? We don't look to the present, or we don't look to the future. So I'm going to start off this talk with sort of the bad news and the bad guys. If I said, maybe I'll just do a quick show of hands, how many people are very comfortable with, who'd be able to explain what DRM and the DMCA is? Okay, so that's good. Okay, I'm glad. If everyone put up their hand, I would feel very, I would feel, have less purpose in the world, so thank you. So in order to sort of explain why DRM and DMCA are problematic, I made this diagram. It is, it's a little problematic. These sort of diagrams are not actually as easy to make as I thought they would be. This is what I was trying to express. I'm trying to express sort of the great circle of life of print documents. You know, someone in the community at the very bottom, they create a work. They bring it to a publisher. The publisher produces many, accepts it, pays for it, makes many copies, sells those documents. The library buys that document. They share it with the community. In the community, a reader becomes an author, which writes a book. It's a beautiful thing. Now, as mentioned in the bio, I'm not from the States, I'm from Canada, and so we have very many similar behaviors, but sometimes we have different reasons. So, for example, I'm also from an academic setting, so when we talk about sort of the rights of what we can use with digital objects, we talk about fair dealing, whereas you may talk about fair use. So I had to do some reading to find out exactly what in US law enshrines the library's right to lend out print books. And so I used the ALA's Library Transform website. It's a really great resource. And even though libraries, public libraries, many libraries were able to lend material way before, I believe it was 1908, the Supreme Court reserved the right, or expressed the right, I'm not a lawyer, so I might be using the wrong words, but they confirmed the right that if you buy a print work, you don't have to ask the publisher if you want to lend that work out, if you wanted to give it away, if you wanted to resell it. That's enshrined in what's known as the first sale doctrine. The challenge is, of course, is that ebooks don't follow under the first sale doctrine. So all that sort of legal framework is out of the picture in that case, and so that the rights essentially have to be negotiated between the creator and the purchaser. Now, so the rights holders, largely publishers, sometimes authors, this is a negotiation. This is all up for grabs. But as you know, I mean, when I buy books from my Amazon Kindle, I don't get a chance to negotiate with Amazon on the conditions of those ebooks. It's sort of a take it or leave it proposition. So a lot of the material that we buy, we don't actually buy, we license. And I'm going to try to read it from here. As licenses are contracts, libraries receive the rights articulated in agreements. And unfortunately, this is the standard usual ebook license. It constrains or prohibits libraries from archiving and preserving content, making accommodations for people with disabilities, ensuring patron privacy, receiving donations of ebooks, or selling ebooks that the library no longer wishes to own. We've lost all those rights, by and large. So this is particularly challenging in many contexts. So I'm trying to speak to a number of contexts, not just academic and not just public, but so in an academic context, as I mentioned, in Canada we have something known as fair dealing. That means that a limited amount of an ebook can be used and copied for the use of self-study, for research or for teaching. That being said, if the library then decides to acquire a suite of ebooks, and in this case, this you can see there's it's hard to see, but essentially there's a terms of license that is prescribing a suite of ebooks that my institution purchases. If that license that we sign says, by the way, you cannot put a copy of that in your course reserved material, and you can't put a copy in your learning management system, then we have actually taken away those rights of our users. How many people here know about the Harvard Business Review 500? Okay, good. All right, another story. This is 2 years ago. This is probably the most egregious story that I've heard about this sort of challenge between giving away rights. The Harvard Business Review exclusively sells, or makes access, sorry, I keep saying selling, it gives access to its material through one intermediary, and that is EBSCO. And 2 years ago, it decided that of all the articles that it makes available through that vendor, the 500 most popular articles, as designated by those two people, those two organizations, you could no longer print them. You were no longer able to print those articles, email those articles, or even provide a persistent link. All you had to do, although you could, as long as you paid, and then I think one library said up to 5 figures. So now libraries have to ask themselves, okay, what is the price of the ability to, we want people to access material, but what's the cost for the ability to print the material? What's an additional cost to email the material? What's an additional cost to provide a link to that material? This is all new material. At what point do we give up access for use? And I don't have any right answers. This is something that I think we're all struggling with in many ways. So just like in a scholarly context where, as I said, certain educational rights for material are kind of taken away, it doesn't matter what material it is. It could be even public domain material. This is an example, you can't see it here, but there was an example where Adobe many years ago, when it started showcasing ebooks, it took the work Alice in Wonderland, which is in the public domain, but because it wrapped it around a licensing term locked with DRM, you were, by accepting those terms, agreeing to the fact that you would not be able to copy the text, print the text, you weren't going to lend the text, you weren't going to give the text to anyone else, and according to the license agreement, it wouldn't let you read it aloud. And so, I'm not sure exactly what the context of that particular legal agreement was, but there is a sort of larger issue when it comes to this idea of being able to read aloud material, because what's so tragic is that the one population who probably could have benefited from the change from print to ebooks are communities with visual disabilities who rely on text to screen readers. Every e-text should be able to be fed into essentially one of those programs and be able to read, but publishers have chosen the authors, what was that, the authors group, it's an authors legal group, they've fought that because they don't want to cannibalize their sales of audiobooks. So DRM is called digital rights management. So anytime you have this sort of licensing agreement and text, DRM is actually a lock that goes on top of it. So that's the lock, for example, that doesn't allow you to copy your DVDs. I don't know how many people in the audience remember, you could actually copy, there was one time where you could copy an audio CD, but you can't copy a DVD, and that's because of DRM. If you buy a book on Amazon, you can't read it on your Kobo or your Nook or whatever is left over now. And the tragedy also, and this is particular to libraries, is that DRM also requires what's known as, frequently requires something known as authentication. So the example here from the Electronic Freedom Foundation, Electronic Frontier Foundation, is if you've bought a video game but can't play it today because the manufacturer's authentication servers are down, are offline, that's DRM. So I'll give you another example. Some years ago, I actually bought music legally on the web, which was crazy. Why would I do that? Because it was a terrible decision. I bought it using a company called Pure Tracks. Sure. I bought licensed copies. That company went under, and now I can no longer acquire that material because the DRM will not let me play that material because it needs to get to the authentication server occasionally to make sure that that's actually my music. And so this means that the lock will not allow librarians to preserve material. As soon as the authentication server is gone, it really restricts our access. Oops, let me back up one thing though. I can't see in the very, very bottom corner, and this is why you've got handouts. The reason why DRM is so powerful is that it's a digital lock, but it's actually not a particularly powerful lock. It's not like the highest form of cryptography that our strongest, darkest Occupy hackers can't get through. The challenge is that in 1998 there was legislation called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which made it illegal to essentially tamper with DRM. So it's quite explicit that if you touch DRM in a way that's it's immediately illegal, and there are some very strong consequences. So this is the sad graph of ebooks, where publishers don't have to lend material to libraries. All the material that we tend to have as ebooks now are a licensed choice. So they could effectively, and some publishers have decided to do this, not make material available by libraries, and they can protect that by DRM. They can sell it directly to a community, and then that community has only a sort of a one-on-one relationship with that publisher. This is a screen capture. This is probably the saddest screen capture I found when I was doing some research on DRM. The question is, can I donate an ebook to the library? I've published a book for teenage girls and would like to donate the ebook to the Carlsbad Library. And I'm not picking on this library. This is endemic of almost every public library. Thank you so much for thinking about us. Unfortunately, right now there is no way for us to incorporate an ebook donation to our collection or sell it at our friend's bookstore. There's a couple reasons for this. One, your ebook probably has some digital rights management technology embedded on it. Secondly, we subscribe our ebook collection from a vendor who also manages the ebooks on our server. We have no way to add an item to our collection. So there's another fundamental issue about that we don't actually own the platforms. We pretty much, I think most of us public libraries use Overdrive, and that's a whole other issue that I won't go into right now, but it makes me sad. Also, what makes a lot of people sad is that the DRM, most of the DRM authentication happens through Adobe, and this happened, I don't have the date here, but this happened, I believe it might have been last year, where it was discovered that Adobe wasn't doing its best in protecting readers' privacy, and was keeping track of what people were doing. So again, the promise that we make to our readers in terms of privacy are, there's third parties that are now involved, and we make use of them, but we don't really have any sort of control over them. And DRM is so powerful as a way to essentially lock out third parties. And this is an article from Wired earlier, I believe this was earlier this year. Companies such as John Deere are putting DRM in their tractors. And the reason why is that, as we know, a lot of our vehicles and our equipment are becoming more and more computerized, but by putting DRM on it, that means it's illegal now for farmers to repair their own tractors, because they are bypassing, that would be essentially, they would break the DMCA. And so they have to go to an authorized dealer. And so when we talk about the library of things, it's really important that we have a library of things without DRM. So, the question is, are we screwed? And that's an allusion to another amazing talk about ebooks from Librarian. So, I don't know. I do know that I would like to see, I think there are librarians who are against DRM, and I think it's important for us to remember that there was a time where, for example, all the music people bought on iTunes, I think it was about a 5-year span, all that music had DRM. It doesn't have DRM anymore. So that's largely because it was a very strong population that were very vocal about not wanting DRM on music anymore. And so I think we also, within the profession, need to have these sort of conversations about at what point do we want DRM, and if we can avoid it, we should. because it's unlikely, and I am not actually advocating for civil disobedience when it comes to DRM. It's not likely that it is not likely we should, I don't know whether it's right to ask public libraries to become your neighborhood wretched hive of scum and villainy. This is a really great presentation where, and I can't remember, Jack, sorry, I couldn't remember your last name. It was exploring what happened if, the public library was, someone who would actually take people aside and say, by the way, listen, I know you really need this. I'll help you unlock the DRM. As a thought experiment, he knew that that's something that we just can't go there. We have to work within the legal system. We have to work within the legal framework. So this is where I want to transition from all the bad news to good news. Jessamine and West made a website called the Librarian of Progress. So, as you know, we don't have a Librarian of Congress at the moment. The job is open. And it's really essential that we get someone who understands sort of the digital issues of our time and thinks of them in a sort of progressive way. Largely because every 3 years or so, the DMCA, the legislation allows for exceptions to be made. And the person who makes those exceptions is the Librarian of Congress. And that's, for example, one of the reasons why you're able to now unlock your cell phone is because one of those DMCA exceptions. So the possibility for an exception so that libraries can preserve digital content is there. The possibility that we can ask for exemptions so that we can make accommodations for people with disabilities is there. Is it likely? But it's possible. And it's something we can work towards. But we have to do things other than wait. So what do we do other than wait? Whoops, back up. We can copy these strategies. I was going to do a whole thing about copying strategies, but that gets a little too abstract. So you're here to learn from each other about various strategies of what libraries can do in sort of digital context. I'm just going to make 5 really, really sort of quick framework sort of strategies that I've seen libraries do. How do they react to the sort of environment where we feel sort of constrained by ebooks? One is to lend out objects that can't be copied readily available. The Ann Arbor District Library lends out musical instruments. They lend out telescopes. They lend out, it's a great thing, they lend out a telescope with the Book of Stars. They lend out all sorts of material. So it's working on the basis that text is no longer a scarcity. So work on something that's not easily copyable. Bill's going to be here tomorrow to talk about, or is he here already? I'm not sure if he's in the room. No, okay. They talk about the idea of going into object creation, object design through makerspaces and crafting. Alternative, I've seen libraries work with the community in providing, for example, sharing co-working space. I believe in Washington what they do is they provide co-working space to sort of people who are involved in entrepreneurism. In exchange, that they provide, these people provide also mentorship or possibly teaching opportunities. And so I think that's a really interesting idea of partnership. One of my favorite discoveries of public libraries are how-to festivals. And I'm not going to talk about too much here, but I think it's a really interesting idea where what they'll do is, has anyone, librarians here have done a how-to festival? Awesome. Okay, I'd love to know more about it. The idea is that you have like this sort of one-day blitz where you partner with all these communities and you're like, okay, we're going to teach you how to do origami. You're going to learn Bollywood dancing. You're going to learn how to do your taxes. All those things, all the things in one day. And they do it with the community and sometimes throughout the community. And I'm really excited about the sort of idea of how that works. And also some of the times the most important thing for a library to be is just to be there, either during times of sort of natural disasters, such as like Hurricane Superstorm Sandy, or just through sort of the human calamities, such as what happened at Ferguson. So that's that was my intro. Now I'm going to talk about copying as a strategy. I am going to talk about copying as a strategy, but first, the reason why it's essential, I think, for libraries to really invest in this idea of copying as a strategy is that human culture is based on copying. This is an article I think it's readily available online. It's from Harper's. I love Harper's. You can download the PDF, or you can get the microfiche, because Harper's is famous for not liking the internet. But this is a really interesting article called "The Ecstasy of Influence." It's a plagiarism, so maybe it's by Jonathan Lethem. You have to read it. It's awesome. I'm going to read a quote. "All mankind is of one author and is one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated." By John Donne. I don't know why I made this slide. This was a bad idea to make a slide. I'm not going to read you this entire text. But it's there to remind me. So this is the story. The story is that a gentleman is watching a movie called 84 Charing Cross Road, and he hears a version of that quote, and he's really taken by it, and he wants to know more. So he goes to the library and he finds the book that the movie is based on, which is 84 Charing Cross Road. And he cannot find a copy. There's no reference to that quote in that book. And he finds out that the movie was actually based on a play, which presumably had that quote, but that play wasn't readily available. So he watches the movie again, and he makes careful note of the actual text that's being read. And then he searches the internet. But he doesn't know that the filmmakers actually have abridged the quote, so it's not, when he's searching it, it's really difficult for him to find. But he finally actually hones in on the librarian's trick, which is to find the least likely bit of text as opposed to the most common text when you're fishing for something on the internet. And he finds it because someone who loves John Donne copied that and had it on his website. So let's go here. I'm gonna look back and read. The lines I sought were from Meditation 17 in Devotions upon Emergent Occasions, which happens to be the most famous thing Donne ever wrote, containing as it does the line, "Never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." My search had led me from a movie to a book, to a play, to a website, and back to a book. Then again, those words are only as famous as they are, probably because Hemingway lifted them from his book title. So literature has been a plundered, fragmentary state for a long time. So I'm not particularly a creative person. I'm really interested in sort of the creative arts, and I'd like to turn on that sort of right side of my brain, but this is something that's all very new to me. But I even understand that when you're starting off something, when I see, for example, my kids, and they love comics, what do the first thing they do? They try to copy their favorite comic. Afterwards, you could see how they would then transform it and combine it. This is a wallpaper that's provided by this gentleman here. He did a very short 4-part movie, sort of internet movie series called Everything is a Remix. It's really great. It really explores this idea of how all arts are sort of based on sort of the copying, transforming, and combining. The very first one is all about music, about remixing. The second one is all about Hollywood and how Hollywood films borrow so much from each other. The third is about invention. We have a lot of ideas about invention, about the sort of the one epiphany that makes the difference, but really it's a combination of ideas that we all build upon. And then the fourth is about how our sort of structure of intellectual property threatens a lot of the ways that we explore creativity in this day and age. So again, I am not advocating stealing from artists, although you could steal like an artist. So for example, I don't feel bad about taking this particular graphic because it was meant to, because right down in the bottom it says steallikeanartist.com. It's almost as if the artist knew that if I really liked this, I would share it. And by sharing it, I would bring it to your attention, and if you responded to this, you would go to that website. Cory Doctorow says that contemporary art is meant for copying, and if it can't be copied, it's not contemporary art. I don't know whether I would go that far, but I do like the idea that there is sort of good theft and bad theft, and it's a normal, natural thing. There's some great stories about how, I think it was like Hunter S. Thompson, when he wanted to, one of the first things he did in his career was he rewrote on a typewriter The Great Gatsby, because he wanted to know how writing a novel like that would feel. That's an extreme case. Don't do that. Anyways, I really love this idea. I did a lot of reading on it. If you like want to know more sort of exploring the law behind this idea of like copying in culture, Common as Air is a really great one. If you like your theory and you like words like mimetic and hegemonic and decursive, Marcus Boone is your guy. I'm personally really fond of the first one, Reality Hunger by David Shields. In particular, he has some really interesting ideas about how early novels and how copying had to do with the whole emergence of that form of literature. I know it was just a lot of fun. So, as we know, when copying is illegal, only outlaws make copies. Also artists, because they get to operate in this sort of like little safe space, which is sort of where they're exploring this idea of legality and not legality. So as I said, it's difficult for us to explore these sort of spaces, but artists can. And so some years ago, Mick Jones from The Clash, he created his own sort of rock and roll library where he took his own personal collection. I think it's more of an archive than a library, myself. 10,000 items, made them readily available, and then made an agreement with a scanning company that fans could come in with a USB key, and anything that they sort of really interested in, they liked, they were encouraged to make a copy of it and then bring it home with them. That was sort of a very sort of punk rock idea. Now, it's punk rock in that I'm sure Mick did not own all the copyright, the intellectual property of those 10,000 items, but you know, he's Mick Jones. And I'm not. And so it's really fun to, I find it very useful to explore how artists think of libraries. Some artists look very sort of future forward, and some are very nostalgic. And some of them really explore this idea between sort of artifact and digital. A colleague of mine, Adam Lauder, some years ago, he wrote an article. It's a Canadian visual arts magazine called C, and they did a whole theme on libraries, and he wrote an essay called Performing the Library. In it, that's where I found this art exhibition, which I thought was really interesting, and it predates, I believe, Mick Jones' library, called the Copy Room. And for this particular project, it lasted a month. I think, from my understanding, the artist took a room that was off the street, put a photocopier, or maybe two, in that space, and the photocopiers were free to anyone in that community on the condition that they had to leave a copy of everything that they made, and that everything that somebody had copied, they left it and it turned into a reading room. So, as I said, within the academic setting of the college and the conceptual framework of the vehicle, this project interrogates the daily regulation of intellectual property and barriers to information access. As an investigation of the copy room furnishes a platform for studying the relationship between the material and virtual distributions. So in some ways, let's look back to what happened at the Great Library of Alexandria. In many ways, this is sort of copying without all the sort of threat of duress. Okay, so now my introduction is really done now. We're going to talk about copying as a form of collection development. Despite DRM and DMCA and being completely above the law. So the first one is this notion of copying while publishing. There may be a number of examples of this. This is the first one that came to mind. Again, I'm Canadian, so this is where there's a number of Canadian examples. So forgive me if your institution knows, you're like, oh, we did this like 4 years ago. You know, we all have our own sort of informational biases. So this came across my mind. I think sooner than most. This was from the Winnipeg Public Library, and they had this really interesting project called Past Forward, where they encouraged everyone in their city. Winnipeg is an amazing musical city. It's like this amazing folk festival. It has an incredible, vibrant art scene. And they asked members of the community to come in and bring their music memorabilia, bring their posters, bring their band, like their band flyers, bring all that sort of material, of which they own their own copyright. Come in, make a copy of it. They use their high-res scanning equipment. That way they can sort of build a time capsule or a digital archive of sort of the music scene at that time. And then, as the artist, you get like a high-res scan of your material. Sort of a win-win situation. In Edmonton Public Library, they've also done this. They've taken it one step further. They've invited, I think it's up to 100 artists to, if they have the rights to do so, provide an album. Local artists providing local albums on their servers that they will distribute for free to library card members. And they call it Capital City Records, which I think is pretty cool. And they also provide posters in a sort of similar manner. Now, I don't know how many people work in institutions that have sort of those book publishing photocopying machines, espresso printers. That's one brand of it. There's a number of other ones. I'm from the city of Windsor. Windsor Public Library, I believe, I think, my understanding is that they have probably one of the most successful programs of this, where people will come in with a book idea, and a library staff member will help them publish the book and then into a softcover book, either one copy or many copies. And over the last 3 years, our public library has made 10,000 printings, which is quite extraordinary. And that's a huge testament, I think, to the staff, because one of the things I understand from these projects is that it's very labor intensive, and it's not even cost effective, but there's no cost recovery at this point. There's no profit being made. Sorry, I should be very careful what I say. I don't think there's a profit being made. However, it's an extraordinary gift to the community. Now, I don't believe that those books are being captured while they're being published, which I can understand why. I mean, that just opens up a whole other sort of level of complexity. But if you go to other self-publishers such as Lulu or Amazon, that's the whole purpose of the system, is that you submit your work, you get printed copies, but then those services also act as distribution channels so that somebody else can order that book from you. So this idea is that as you're printing copies, you're building a publishing catalog at the same time. Now again, a lot of that is not, we haven't explored that space quite a bit because, as I said, we haven't really owned sort of our own ebooks technology. There are projects out there where they're trying to look into more ebook hosting. I believe Colorado State, I know that they're working on their own sort of ebook service. They have like an amazing little manifesto about how it's important to control sort of the ebook distribution. And for them, it's really important for them to have the library connect directly with different publishers as opposed to a third party handling sort of those sort of publisher relationships. That was my understanding. I can't speak really too much more about that project though. So there's another idea that's more relevant within academia, and that is this idea that we have to worry about sort of publishing copying before publishing. Again, a really bad choice of text, or a slide, lots of text, but I just wanted to remember, so Marcus Boone was the gentleman who wrote sort of in praise of copying, and I believe in that book and in this article, he cites the work of a scholar who, and her name is Kate Eicher. She has done sort of the research about copy shops around the University of Toronto, and in her work she says, listen, the scribes have been around medieval universities. Copy shops, you know, they've lived in existence by universities since the medieval times. I don't know about your organization, but I almost guarantee that every single university or college, if they don't have an official photocopier on campus, they may have an official photocopier on campus, but there is one like that a block or two away. Sure. That will pretty much copy anything, and then if you come in with a textbook, they're not going to say anything. And that relationship has been there for a long time. Again, I'm not advocating it, I'm just saying. That happens. So universities, the whole act of copying, getting copies of text, learning from text, is an essential service. And when we can't legally do it on campus, there are organizations just off campus that seem to do that. But that's not really the copying I want to bring attention to. Now, I started work at the Leddy libraries. I think I counted it makes me sad, 16 years ago. When I started, we were in the midst of the serials crisis. We've been in the serials crisis, at least now, it's like, it was in the midst of it then. It's been 16 years. The serials crisis, of course, is this whole challenge of that and all institutions of higher learning, pretty much, We fund scholars, faculty members to produce research indirectly. They create works, but they give away their copyright to publishers, sometimes society publishers, but more often than not, for-profit publishers who create subscription costs that increase every year, that have very high subscription rates. The libraries then have to buy back that research that's being produced for free. And so that is the sort of the dilemma that's at hand. So one of the strategies that universities have employed is by hosting research on what's known as an institutional repository. And the way to think of it like an institutional repository is to think of it sort of as, in some nations they have what's known as legal deposit. The idea is that if you're a nation, like if you're the Kingdom of Britain, you can say, listen, you're going to publish in our kingdom, that's fine, but you always have to give us one copy of every work for copyright reasons or for whatever reason. And that way you create your national biography, you create your national library by a sort of a decree of law. Universities don't really have that ability to make those sort of strong decrees, but they can write mandates. They can tie things into funding agreements. They can tie things into funding agreements so that if you want to get public funding for this research, you must place a copy of that in the institutional repository. The problem is that third-party publishers, such as Elsevier, have made it very difficult for us to do that. So for one of them is that they will say, listen, you cannot put the end product. You must put the pre-product in. You can't put that sort of nice polished PDF. You have to put in the Word document, or I'm assuming most of them are Word documents. I don't think anyone uses WordPress or WordPerfect or anything, but the preprints. And so libraries, institutional libraries, have to sort of chase down sort of the pre-publication rights. We know that sort of mandate policy was very effective, I would think, because Elsevier, until recently, made it a policy where essentially it said, it's okay, by and large, for authors to put copies into institutional repositories, unless they're mandated to, and in that case, they're not allowed to. And that was a very odd restriction that we had to deal with until recently. Elsevier now is, if you're interested, they've changed their focus. They're now really, looks like they're targeting green EA, so green OA, green open access. So that's usually a good sign that that's something we should really work for. Just to anyway. So I was talking about copying domains. I mentioned that there are certain countries where there are laws by which that are decreed that it's called a legal deposit. That publishers have to create deposit a copy into the National Library. That way the National Library has an awesome library. The British Library also has extended that work, and they've done remarkable work in essentially capturing the British web archiving. Canada is so far behind, it's ILEAD. But they do some sort of remarkable work. So they're extending this idea of legal deposit. Some of the stuff they make readily available. Some of it is only available from within the library to protect, of course, privacy and some of the interests of publishers, of course. And I think web archiving is the sort of new, it's not so new, but it's still, it's still new for many institutions. For example, I don't think my institution is involved yet in web archiving, but some of my sister institutions are. And I really wish we were, because I worry a bit about if something happens, if something like the next sort of disaster or something of national interest happens in your hometown, are you going to be ready to capture it? And I keep thinking of this example, the University of Virginia Library, they had some experience with web archiving, and then suddenly when they had sort of the national spotlight on their campus, when their university president was made to resign by their board, they were able to start collecting the history as it was unfolding on their campus. And they have already an archive dedicated to that event. And so that's sort of the ready test for me. Is my institution ready if there was some sort of calamity? Are we able to sort of capture history as it unfolds? Now, one of the things that we're very lucky is that all of us have access to the Internet Archive. And the Internet Archive, if you know the Wayback Machine, they save past copies of websites, but that's really dependent on their crawlers. If there's something you think is really important that should be saved, they do make it readily available now under a Save Page Now. You can submit that article to be saved, and already it has sort of changed some of the news and discourse where websites, I think it was a Russian jet, someone had saved a blog, some sort of blog that sort of provided evidence that I believe, sorry, I can't remember the details, I believe it was something like this, that there were Russians in Ukraine. That blog was taken down and a copy was at the Wayback Machine, but because someone had noticed that this is probably going to be of really important, of very strong importance. So if you think that something might be taken down that you think might be in the public's interest, it's worth knowing that that's there for you. Now, the problem, of course, is that the Wayback Machine is not perfect, and in fact, there's a very, very simple way to circumvent it, and that is what's known as the Robotstxt file. It's a practice whereby anybody who doesn't want to be indexed by Google or have a copy of their material in the Wayback Machine just has to say no thank you and put that file on their server, and both Google and the Internet Archive will oblige. And that seems all fair and good, but there's some fortunate sort of legacy problems because of this policy. There are examples where there have been amazing websites that have been made, communities, entire communities build around them, and then those communities fade, the domain name lapses, someone else buys that domain name, puts a Robotstxt file on, and then it erases all the past history at the Wayback Machine. And I've been reading a number of comments. I don't know whether the Wayback Machine can address them. Right now they're not. And so again, all the more reason for, I believe, institutions like, especially academic libraries, but maybe even public libraries, national libraries, all levels of libraries, should be involved in thinking about what do we want to save from today that might be useful on the web, and how do we make sure that there's a copy. And of course, I love the fact that there is a system that tries to make sure that things are safe by making sure that there's lots of copies, because lots of copies keep stuff safe. Another challenge is the idea of saving social media. Social media, we think of the web as being sort of made out of gossamer and ephemeral and disappears and changes every day. And that's something probably triply true when it comes to social media. Ed Summers has done some great writing around the work that he's done about saving, for example, trying to save the tweets with hashtags that associated it with, say, with Ferguson. And it's important to do it in the moment because the way to capture a lot of tweets is to make use of the sort of the computer backend of Twitter, which is their API. So that means your machine comes in and says, can I have 10 tweets, can I have 10 tweets, can I have 10 tweets? But you can only go as far back as 9 days. And so with a lot of social media, we talk about how social media saves things forever, but everything is for free. But I think in particular with things with Twitter, we have to remember that the present is free, but the past is is costs money. And that's something that if you have money, you can pay Twitter, and they can give you access to some of that history, but it's all up to them. So if you do want to save an event that's happening on social media, you have to do it really within that moment. But again, the challenges are that even when you want to save a lot of tweets, you're still beholden to some of the sort of policy ideas of these organizations. So for example, Twitter recently decided that organizations like the Sunshine Foundation, they had a number of web accounts called Politwoops, and its sole purpose was to capture tweets from politicians that were then deleted, because their stance was that these are items that were made publicly, these are public statements from politicians, and the fact that a politician then erased them afterwards means that it may become embarrassing, so maybe it's highlighting a change in policy, maybe it's just, it reveals a sort of side or a character that we think the public should know about. And Twitter changed essentially I don't know whether Twitter changed their API, whether, anyways, the relationship has changed, and so that those services are no longer possible. And that's because of, it's Twitter, and they can do what they want. Now that's not to say that just archiving tweets doesn't have its own problems, in that what are the responsibilities for people who keep the archive? What is the responsibility in terms of privacy? What are the responsibilities of people who change their minds afterwards? I mean, it's not that we don't want people to not have the ability to change their positions on statements. What does it mean in terms of the right to be forgotten? What happens if if you think your life might be in danger if somebody finds out that you've made a stance on a particular way? So these are all topics worth exploring, and I believe Alexandria's just gone back to school. I think he's working on his PhD to sort of study these sort of archival issues, and I think they're really interesting. Another strategy that we could provide is libraries, that I think all of us can do. I mean, we've talked a lot about sort of web archiving, and that takes some sort of degree of technology. But there are other things that we can do that don't have to require sort of a large infrastructure. And that is just providing items to copy. So I mentioned before about how, Mick Jones' rock and roll library, where you have this space where you can copy material that you like. There's a couple of really interesting artist libraries. One is the Prelinger Library on the West Coast, and in New York City, I think it's Brooklyn, sorry. There's the Reanimation Library, where the librarian, who's also an artist, he has collected all sorts of material, largely from sort of like junk sales and like library discards and his own collection and book sales, of just amazing sort of visual resources. So the idea is that everything in the item is probably inspirational, probably has like an amazing look and feel that as an artist you could go in there and you just grab a book from the shelf and it will cause you some sort of visual inspiration of sorts. I find out about projects like this, and I highly recommend I've got a copy of the Artist Library. This is from the people who run the library's incubator weblog. I have not read the book on the, my left, your right, left, right. Bibliocraft, which is using library resources to jumpstart creative projects. That's from, I believe, a librarian who has a blog called Dickens, the Handmade Librarian. Anyway, she describes sort of this sort of similar ideas of how can the library be a resource for artists. And so on her blog, she describes this particular project where you can make very, very fancy bookmarks by embroidering fonts that are based on an ornamental stitch, an alphabet specimen that was found in the San Francisco Public Library. And one of the things I would love all libraries to do, including my own, so I've got my own sort of to-do list to work on, is for libraries to find ways where they can create like collections like this one, like San Francisco Public Library, where they said, listen, we have the etching and engraving picture file is composed of copyright-free illustrations from the late 19th and early 20th century. So which means that it is an inspirational file. You can build on it because it's in the public domain, there's no copyright. Artists can use it freely, don't have to worry about it, and they've got a great sort of visual resource. This is the penultimate section. So libraries, by and large, are not just thinking of places where we can access information. A lot of our projects are involved with looking at our community as a place where they can learn and grow and build their own thing. And so November is coming up. How many people are going to write a novel next month? No one. That's good, I'm not going to. The National NaNoWriMo blog. But there's a number of libraries that host these sort of like-minded people who want to, they've always wanted to write a book. And the month of November is where people can find support. They find support in the library. And if you do run one of these programs, all I can suggest in terms of advice is to not be surprised and not to be hopefully taken to back if more and more people start writing fan fiction. Fan fiction is it's not new, but it's an important way where people learn about the art of writing. If character creation is difficult, they can sort of work on the characters they love. They have a community of support where they can write with each other. The legality of fan fiction is still in contention. In some ways, the very act of writing a character that's not yours could be construed as illegal, but there are more and more populations, this is an organization where it says fan works are fair use. They're making the argument that these are transformative works, and so it's still unfolding. I tried not to talk too much about licensing because it's early in the morning. But if you can, if there's any sort of bit of homework or if there's any sort of challenge, I would highly recommend reading more about sort of the Creative Commons license. So the idea is that if you want to make something readily available for other people to build on, you don't have to. People don't have to contact you and say, look, can I use this research guide? Can I use this? You don't have to do that. You can say Creative Commons, it's there for you to use and to reuse. If one note, and maybe this will come up in the questions or whatever, also consider as much as if you work in sort of like libraries and nonprofits, you might have sort of an aversion to using sometimes there's a temptation to say, I want non-commercial use. I want this use to be free. I would suggest not to do that. That's all I would say. We'll talk maybe a little about that afterwards, or maybe not. But just putting CC attribution, I think, is really important. And if we just to let people, I think even our own library websites, we should do more effort to essentially make sure that we make stuff available for sharing for other people. So just a sort of a reminder and a recap. People copy stuff they like. They don't copy stuff they don't like. The more work copies, the more valuable it becomes. Value is not taken away by fans, it's added by them each time they copy. And so I don't know the original person who said it, but they said the greatest threat to most artists isn't piracy, it's obscurity. And, free licenses, what is CC BY? What is CC ND? I can't even remember the other acronym that says like no. Sometimes it's simple as saying, listen, copy is an act of love, please copy. Because books are for reuse. So I used a lot of images from other people, so I couldn't put a big CC BY on top of my presentation. What I will do is I will host these diagrams and the raw images of the diagrams, so if you ever want to reuse them, these will be in the Creative Commons domain, and then they can be readily available to you. So just to recap, in the world of print, we had the beautiful circle of life. Then DRM came in and made everyone sad, except publishers. But that doesn't have to be the end of the story. We can make material readily available. We can try to find ways to coexist. We can find ways to sort of build on each other and grow. Through CC, which is Creative Commons, and OA, which is known as Open Access. So one of the things I think about when I think of the Ranganathan's 5 laws is I think it's the only common thing that we all have from various library education that we can all remember. That's my challenge. And so we know that the very first law there's something of a particular beauty of the laws because we always seem to remember them, and we always seem to remember that books are for use. Barbara Pfister, who is a writer and a librarian and an academic, and she's a personal hero of mine, there was one day where she was feeling particularly cynical, and she rewrote the 5 laws and sort of the zeitgeist, particular zeitgeist of our time. Books are valuable property, every customer choice, every product exposure improves the customer experience, and the library must grow its market. But then she rewrote these 5 laws, and I absolutely adore her reworking, and it resonates with me in all sorts of ways. I hope it resonates with you. Books are for reuse. Every book, many authors. Every author, many stories. save the dreams of the reader, and the library is a place to grow. I can't improve on any of those books, so that is the end of my talk.